Prologue. The Vulkov line did not begin to die with a bang, but with a whisper, a fracture in the code, a ghost in their genes, passed down through 1,000 years of starlight and steel. The first to feel it called it the quiet fade, a slow hollowing of their power, a gradual silencing of the psychic song that bound them together. With each generation, the whisper grew louder. Powers that once commanded the elements dwindled, lifespans shortened. The vibrant energy in their eyes dimmed to a mere flicker. They were a great oak tree, and a sickness was creeping through their roots, turning their leaves to dust. Their future? A slow, inexorable march toward extinction. But with the curse came a prophecy. It spoke of a day when the fractured code would be made whole, a reunification. It foretold the coming of the Genesis marker, not a cure to be taken, but a living keystone. A woman, an unsuspecting soul, would carry it in her blood, the missing half of their own. To find her, to mark her, to bind her to the Alpha line, was to save their people. To fail? It was to be the last of their kind, utterly. For centuries they searched. For centuries, they found nothing. Then, in the final hour of their decline, a sign appeared. Triplets, born to the ruling Alpha, their combined resonance a beacon of desperate hope. Caspian, the strategist, Orion, the warrior, and Silas, the empath. 3 sides of a single coin. They were the ones. And now, after a lifetime of waiting, of watching the ghosts in their blood grow bolder, the long silence has been broken. The marker has been found. The final, terrible act of 1,000-year-old destiny is about to begin. Chapter 1. The Final Piece. The air in the Apex Tower's command center was always the same. Cold, clean, silent, except for the low, steady hum of the machines that kept their world turning. Caspian Vulkov stood at the center of it all, a king in a castle of glass and light. Before him, a huge map of the city, Viridia, floated in the air, a shimmering ghost made of data points and glowing streets. He had spent his whole life looking at maps like this, because the world to him was just a big, complicated puzzle, a problem to be solved. And today, he was going to solve it. His heart was a quiet, steady drum inside his chest. Not fast, not excited, just sure. This was not about joy. This was about an answer. A plan he'd made a lifetime ago, finally coming true. A young tech, a kid named Jorik with nervous eyes, stood a few feet away. He held a datapad like it might bite him. Alpha Caspian. Jorik swallowed hard. The sound was too loud in the silent room. The final report is in. We found it. Caspian didn't turn. He kept his eyes on the glowing map. Are you certain, Jorik? Not just close. Not a maybe. I need 100%. Yes, Alpha, 100%. The genetic signature is a perfect match, a flawless echo of the original code, Jorik said, his voice shaking a little. The Genesis marker, it's real. She's real. For a long moment, Caspian said nothing. He just breathed in the cold, clean air. He felt the words settle over him, not like a warm blanket, but like a perfectly crafted piece of armor clicking into place. It was done. The waiting was over. This was the moment that would save them from the quiet fade, the sickness in their blood that made each generation weaker than the last. It was the only reason he was born, to see this moment, to make this choice. He finally turned, his face calm, his eyes like cool gray stones. Show me. Jorik tapped on his datapad. A new window of light opened in the air next to the map. It was a picture. A profile of a young woman. Her name was Lyra Vance, age 22. She had dark hair that curled around her shoulders and a soft look on her face. The file said she lived a quiet life, sheltered. No real friends, worked in a small library. Simple. Caspian looked at the details, at her face, at the notes about her life. To him, they were not the story of a person. They were just Variables. Facts on a page. Things to be managed. He felt nothing when he looked at her picture. No spark. No connection. Just the cold, hard fact that she was the key. She was the cure. Her life, her feelings, her choices, they didn't matter. Not when the survival of his entire clan was on the line. The coordinates? Caspian asked, his voice flat. He dismissed her picture with a wave of his hand. It vanished like smoke. Jorik's fingers flew across the pad. Sector Gamma 7, the outer residential district, apartment 4B. Her movements are predictable. She should be there now. He paused, then added, Sir, there's one more thing. A small energy reading near her location. It's strange. Not part of her signature, but it's there. We can't explain it.
An unexplained variable. Caspian's jaw tightened for a second. An annoyance. But a small one. It didn't change the plan. Nothing could change the plan. He had to do this, because if he didn't, his people would fade into nothing. He dismissed the worry, pushing it down into the cold, quiet place where he kept all his feelings. It was a weakness he couldn't afford. It's irrelevant, Caspian said. Send the full data packet to my private console, and tell my brothers to meet me in the briefing room, now. Yes, Alpha. Jorik bowed his head and hurried away, leaving Caspian alone again in the humming silence. He turned back to the glowing map. A single point of light pulsed in Sector Gamma 7. Lyra. The final piece of the puzzle. He felt the cold, hard certainty of his own logic settle over him. Destiny wasn't a choice. It was a strategy. And his was finally ready. His gaze was fixed, his purpose clear, but a quiet question echoed in the back of his mind. What was that strange energy? And why did it feel like a whisper of something he hadn't planned for? Chapter 2. A fragile bond. Moving from the cold certainty of the command center, Caspian found his brothers waiting in the briefing room. The room was warmer than the command center, with dark wood walls and soft chairs, but the mood was just as serious. Orion was standing by the window looking out at the city below. He was built like a warrior, big and strong, with restless energy that always seemed ready for a fight. Silas was sitting in one of the chairs, his head down, his hands tracing patterns on the armrest. He was leaner than them, and he always had a quiet sadness in his eyes, like he felt the world's pain a little too much. They were 3 parts of a whole, bound together by blood and by the power they shared. A psychic bond connected them, a low thrum that was always there. Right now, that thrum was buzzing with tension. Orion turned as Caspian entered, a sharp, fierce grin on his face. So, it's time? He asked. His voice was a low rumble like distant thunder. He was ready. He was always ready for a fight. It's time, Caspian confirmed. He walked to the head of the long table and placed his hands on it, leaning forward. The data is confirmed. The location is locked. We move tonight. Good, Orion said, clapping his big hands together. We go in, we take her, we perform the marking. Simple, clean. It's not simple, Orion, Silas said softly without looking up. His voice was the opposite of Orion's, gentle and full of doubt. She's not a package to be collected. She's a person. A woman who has no idea her life is about to be torn apart. Have you thought about what this will do to her? Orion scoffed. I've thought about what will happen if we don't do this. We fade. We disappear. Our people. Our history. Everything. Gone. Her life for the lives of our entire clan. It's not a choice, Silas. It's a duty. Duty doesn't make it right, Silas whispered. He finally looked up and his eyes, a deep, soulful brown, found Caspian's. Is there no other way? Can we not talk to her? Explain it? Caspian felt a familiar flicker of annoyance. Silas always did this. He always saw the emotions, the human cost, and Orion always saw the fight, the direct path. It was Caspian's job to see the strategy, the bigger picture. Their feelings were just more variables to be managed, necessary but not important. No, Silas, there is no other way, Caspian said, his voice leaving no room for argument. He had to be strong, because their unified front was our greatest weapon. We can't risk her saying no. We can't risk her running. We've waited centuries for this chance. We will not let it slip away, because we're worried about one person's feelings. Her destiny is tied to ours now. She must accept that. A destiny she didn't choose, Silas argued, standing up. That sounds a lot like a cage, Caspian. It's a sanctuary, Orion shot back, stepping closer to Silas. We're not hurting her. We're bringing her into our world, protecting her, giving her a purpose she could never dream of. She will be the most important person in our clan. Isn't that a gift? Caspian watched them, his brothers, the warrior and the empath, fire and water. Their bond was a fragile thing right now, pulled in two different directions. He could feel their emotions bleeding into his own mind through their psychic link. Orion's fierce excitement, Silas's deep sadness. He pushed it all down. He had to be the anchor, the cold, hard logic that held them together. Enough, Caspian said. The word cut through the air and both his brothers fell silent. He looked at each of them, his gaze firm. Orion is right. This is about survival. And Silas is right to be concerned. We will not harm her. We will give her everything she could ever want. But the marking is not negotiable. It will happen tonight. He paused, letting the finality of his words sink in. We are the last hope for our people. We must do this, together. Do you both agree? Orion nodded, his jaw set. He clapped Caspian on the back, his touch heavy and solid. I'm with you. Silas looked at Caspian for a long moment, his sad eyes searching for something. Some hint of doubt, maybe. He found none. With a slow, resigned sigh, he nodded too. I agree. Caspian felt the thrum of their bond tighten, the tension easing into a shared sense of purpose. But it was a fragile consensus. He knew Silas was only agreeing because he had to, not because he believed it was right. For the first time, a real crack appeared in their unity. As they prepared to leave, Silas stopped him. Caspian, be careful, he said, his voice low. I had a feeling, like a dream. I saw her, but there was a shadow around her. Something dark. It felt hungry. Another warning. First the energy reading, now Silas's premonition. Was it all connected? Caspian wanted to dismiss it. He needed to, because questioning the plan now, after all this time, was a path to failure. We will be careful, Caspian said, pushing past him. But as he walked away, the image of a shadow lingered in his mind, a cold spot in his perfect, logical plan. Chapter 3. The Weight of a Curse. Later that night, alone in his private quarters, Caspian tried to push the worries out of his mind. His rooms were the opposite of the command center. They were simple, almost empty. A bed, a desk, a single chair. He didn't need comfort. He needed focus. And right now, he needed to remember why. Why he was about to do something so drastic. Why he had to ignore his brother's sadness and the fear in a young tech's eyes. He pulled up the archives on his desk console. Not data this time, but history. Ancient texts and genetic maps, side by side. On one side of the screen, he saw the words of his ancestors, written in a language as old as their clan. They described the quiet fade, the bloodline curse, as a sickness of the soul, a punishment from a forgotten god. On the other side, he saw the science, the cold, hard proof, a genetic sequence slowly degrading. He watched a simulation that showed the Vulkov DNA strand over 1,000 years. It was like watching a bright, strong rope slowly fray, one thread at a time, until it was thin and weak, ready to snap. That was his people. That was their future. Extinction. He had to do this because the science proved the prophecy was their only hope. The Genesis marker wasn't just a myth. It was a missing piece of their genetic code. A key to lock their DNA back into a stable, healthy form. Without it, His generation would be the last. He, Orion, and Silas would be the final, fading whisper of a great and powerful line. He remembered his grandfather. When Caspian was a boy, his grandfather was the Alpha, a man whose presence could shake a room, whose power felt like the sun. But the quiet fade had taken him piece by piece. Caspian had watched him grow frail, his mind clouded, his power sputtering out like a dying candle. The last time Caspian saw him, the great Alpha couldn't even lift a glass of water. That memory was burned into his mind. It was a story he told himself whenever his resolve wavered. He would not let that happen to his brothers. He would not let that be their end. He ran a hand over his face, the weight of it all pressing down on him. This wasn't just about tradition. This was about survival. He was not a monster forcing himself on an innocent woman. He was a leader making a hard choice to save everyone he had ever known. He had to believe that. He had to hold on to that logic, because if he let in the emotion, the doubt, the what-ifs, he would drown in them. What if Silas was right? What if this act broke them, not just her? What if the cost of saving their future was losing their souls? No. He couldn't think like that. Control was his strength. Strategy was his shield. He had to believe in his plan. He looked away from the grim history on his screen and at the tactical display next to it. A countdown timer was ticking down in stark red numbers. It was almost time. The perfect moment for the marking, calculated by planetary alignments and energy cycles, a tradition wrapped in science. His heart, usually a steady drum, began to beat faster, a real thumping rhythm that he could feel in his throat. It was anticipation, the feeling of a predator right before the hunt. He had been preparing for this moment his entire life, to be strong, to be decisive, to be the Alpha his people needed. But under that, there was something else, a flicker of something cold and sharp. Fear, not for himself, but fear of failure. Fear that even his perfect plan was not enough. The strange energy reading. Silas's vision of a shadow. They were loose threads, and he hated loose threads. The countdown hit 0. A soft chime echoed through his silent room. The time was now. Caspian stood up, his body moving with purpose. He pushed the fear down, buried it deep under 1,000 years of duty and a lifetime of control. He was Caspian Vulkov, Alpha of his clan. And he would not fail. He had a destiny to fulfill and a woman to claim. It was time to go get her. Chapter 4. The Mark of Destiny. The best part of Lyra's day was the quiet. It was a soft, fuzzy blanket she wrapped around herself after a long shift at the library. Her small apartment, tucked away in the sleepy outer districts of Viridia, always smelled like old books and chamomile tea. It was safe. It was hers. Tonight, the rain whispered against her window pane, a gentle rhythm that made the silence feel even cozier. She was curled on her worn-out sofa, a half-read book resting on her chest, her mind drifting toward sleep. It was a simple life, a predictable life, and she loved it. That's why the sound of the front door unlocking, when she knew it was locked, sent a jolt of pure ice through her veins. Her heart hammered against her ribs. She wasn't expecting anyone, especially not someone with their own key. She sat up, her book thudding to the floor. The sound was like a gunshot in the sudden heavy silence. The rain outside seemed to stop. The air grew thick, charged with an energy that made the hair on her arms stand up. 3 men stepped into her apartment. They didn't look like robbers. They were dressed in dark, expensive-looking clothes that seemed to swallow the light in the room. They moved with a strange, silent grace that was anything but normal. One was huge, built like a mountain, with eyes that burned with a fierce, restless fire. Another was quieter, his face etched with a deep, sorrowful kindness. But it was the one in the middle who stole her breath. He was tall, his presence filling the entire room, his face a mask of cold, handsome control. His eyes, a cool, stormy gray, landed on her, and it felt like being pinned in place. There was no emotion in his gaze. Nothing. It was like he was looking at an object, a thing he had come to collect. "Lyra Vance?" he asked. His voice was calm, a low, powerful sound that vibrated through the floor. It wasn't really a question. Lyra's throat was dry. She couldn't speak. She could only nod, her mind screaming at her to run, to scream, to do something. But she was frozen, trapped by the weight of their presence. They moved to surround her, not quickly, but with a slow, sure purpose, like predators closing in. The big one stood near the door, blocking her only escape. The sad one stayed back, his eyes full of pity. And the leader, he stepped right in front of her. What do you want?" she finally choked out. The leader, Caspian, didn't answer. He just looked at her, and she felt a strange thrum in the air between them, a silent song that only her bones could hear. He raised his hand, and his brothers did the same. There was no weapon, no threat of violence, just this overwhelming power that pushed down on her, making it hard to breathe. He saw the terror in her eyes. It was a variable he had expected but had not truly prepared for. It was distracting. He pushed it aside. The plan. Stick to the plan. He closed his eyes for a second, focusing his will, joining it with the power of his brothers. The bond between the three of them surged, a river of energy that they had controlled their entire lives. Now they directed it at her. The marking began. It wasn't a physical touch. It was a flood of pure resonance, a wave of golden light and ancient power that crashed into her. He felt the moment their alpha essence, his, Orion's, and Silas's, poured into her, searching for the Genesis marker. He felt it connect. A jolt, sharp and electric, shot through him. The bond flared to life, a searing biological and psychic chain that snapped into place, linking the four of them together forever. It was more intense than he could have ever imagined. The prophecies spoke of reunification, but this felt like a supernova. A powerful primal satisfaction roared through him. Victory. But underneath it was her. He felt her panic, her terror, her confusion, not as an observer, but as if it were his own. It was a shock, a sudden wave of human feeling so raw and real that it almost knocked him off his feet. His carefully constructed walls of control cracked. This wasn't a sterile transaction. This was alive and messy.
Pain. Not a physical pain, but something deeper. Her mind, her soul, felt like it was being torn open and rewritten. A white-hot light filled her vision, and she felt them. Inside her head, their thoughts, their power, their ancient history, all of it pouring into her. It was a violation. And then, just as suddenly as it began, it was over. The pressure was gone. The three men stood before her, the leader's eyes now wide with a flicker of shock. She was trembling, gasping for breath, the phantom feeling of their presence still crawling under her skin. She felt connected to them in a way that made her sick to her stomach. The leader, Caspian, reached for her. His composure was back, his face a mask of control once more. "It is done," he said, his voice a little rough. "You will come with us now." The spell of fear finally broke. Rage, hot and pure, took its place. They had invaded her home. They had invaded her mind. As they pulled her toward the door, she found her voice. It wasn't a plea. It was a weapon. A raw, human cry of pain and fury that cut through the night. "Dad!" she screamed, the name ripping from her throat. "Daddy! Help me!" The sound shocked them. The leader flinched, a crack in his perfect armor. It was the sound of a daughter crying for her father, a sound that had no place in his cold, logical plan.
Chapter 5. The Gilded Cage. Caspian had planned for every possibility. Resistance, crying, pleading. But the raw animal defiance Lyra showed was a variable he hadn't properly weighted. Back in the Apex Tower, he led her not to a cell, but to the sanctuary, a suite of rooms so luxurious they made palaces look poor. It had soft carpets, a wall that showed a peaceful forest scene, and a table loaded with her favorite foods, data he'd gathered from her online shopping habits. This was his strategy for control: overwhelm her with kindness. Show her this was a gift, not a prison. He thought it was a brilliant move because it was logical. It failed completely. "Where am I?" she demanded, her voice shaking with rage, not fear. She stood in the middle of the room, her arms crossed, her eyes blazing. She was like a cornered wildcat, all claws and fury. Caspian kept his own voice calm and even. He had to manage her, to reason with her. That was his goal. "This is the sanctuary. It is your new home. You are safe here." "Safe?" She let out a sharp, bitter laugh. "I was safe in my apartment until you and your thugs broke in and did that to me. What did you do to me?" She rubbed her temples, a look of disgust on her face. He could feel the echo of her anger through the new bond, a buzzing annoyance in the back of his own mind. He had to make her understand, because if she understood, she would comply. "We initiated a bond. It's called the marking. It was necessary. My people, the Vulkov clan, are dying. Our bloodline carries a genetic flaw, a curse. You carry the cure, the Genesis marker. By bonding you to us, you save us from extinction. You are our salvation, Lyra." He said the words with weight and importance. He was offering her a destiny, a noble purpose. She stared at him, her expression unreadable for a moment. He thought for a second that his logic had reached her. Then she screamed. It was a raw, frustrated sound, and she spun around and shoved a priceless, ancient vase off a pedestal. It shattered on the floor, the sound echoing the shattering of his plan. "I am not your cure," she yelled, her chest heaving. "I am not your salvation. I am a person. Did that ever occur to you? Or am I just a piece of a puzzle for you to move around?" Her words hit him like a physical blow because they were so close to the truth. She was a piece of the puzzle, the most important piece. Why couldn't she see the honor in that? His frustration grew. This was illogical. Her defiance was a bug in the system, a variable he could not control. His entire life was built on control. He felt his authority slipping, and he didn't like it. "I am trying to give you everything," he said, his voice tight. "A life of comfort, of importance. Anything you want, you can have." "Anything I want?" She shot back, her eyes flashing dangerously. "I want to go home. I want you out of my head. I want my life back. Can you give me that?" Of course he couldn't. The question was a trap, and he knew it. He had no answer for it. His logic had failed him. He, Caspian Vulkov, the master strategist, had no idea what to do with one furious, defiant woman who refused to be a pawn in his game. This was the first true crack in his armor, the moment his perfect logical world began to crumble. He believed in destiny. She believed in choice. And he was starting to realize those two things could not exist in the same room. Before he could respond, a screen on the wall flickered to life. It was a news broadcast, and the face on the screen made Caspian's blood run cold. It was an older man, with sharp, intelligent eyes and a face known across the globe. Elias Vance, Lyra's father. "My daughter, Lyra Vance, has been abducted," Elias was saying, his voice filled with a father's panicked rage. "Taken from her home by the reclusive alpha of the Vulkov clan, Caspian Vulkov, and his brothers. I am asking the Global Council for their immediate intervention. These monsters have kidnapped my daughter, and I will not rest until she is returned to me. I will burn their empire to the ground if I have to." The broadcast went viral in seconds. A secret mission to save his clan had just become a public war, and Lyra, the woman screaming at him in the middle of his gilded cage, looked from her father's face on the screen to his, and for the first time he saw a flicker of something new in her eyes. Hope. Chapter 6. The Public Crisis. The broadcast was a declaration of war, not with soldiers and guns, but with information and politics. In the space of 30 seconds, Elias Vance had transformed Caspian from a savior of his people into a public monster, a kidnapper. The carefully built world of secrecy and control that the Vulkov clan lived in was shattered. Caspian stood frozen in the sanctuary, the sound of the broken vase crunching under his feet, and felt a new kind of emotion boil up inside him. Cold, strategic panic. This was not the plan. This was a nightmare. His new immediate goal was clear: contain the crisis. He had to defend his clan, his brothers, and his actions to the Global Council, which was already flooding his private channels with urgent demands for a meeting. He turned away from Lyra, whose defiant stare now felt like a part of the attack against him. He left her in the sanctuary, the silent thrum of her hope a galling presence in his mind, and strode back to the command center. His brothers were already there, their faces grim. The news report was playing on every screen, Elias Vance's face multiplied 100 times, his angry words echoing in the vast, sterile room. The mood had shifted from the fragile consensus of a few hours ago to the sharp, ugly edge of a true crisis. His carefully laid plan was already in tatters. "We have to shut him up," Orion growled, his fists clenched at his sides. He paced back and forth like a caged lion. "He's painting us as villains to the whole world. I'll lead a team myself. We'll find him. We'll silence him. Permanently." "And make him a martyr?" Silas countered, his voice sharp with alarm. He stood perfectly still, his hands clasped behind his back, but Caspian could feel the waves of anxiety rolling off him through their bond. Killing him would prove him right. It would turn the entire world against us. We can't use force to solve this, Orion. That's what he wants. "So what do we do, Silas? Let him burn our house down around us?" Orion shot back. "He's attacking our finances, our reputation, everything our family has built for 1,000 years. "We should talk to Lyra," Silas said, his gaze shifting to Caspian. "Her father is doing this for her. If we can convince her to make a statement, to say she is here by choice." Caspian let out a short, harsh laugh. "She just smashed a priceless artifact because I used the word destiny, Silas. She thinks I'm a monster. She is not going to help us. She sees her father as her rescuer." He felt trapped. Orion's way was foolish and would lead to open war. Silas's way was naive and would lead to nothing. Two bad options. His perfect strategy had crumbled into a choice between a sword and a prayer, and he had no faith in either. This was his fault. He had underestimated his opponent. He'd seen Lyra as the asset, but he'd forgotten about her father. Elias Vance wasn't just some worried dad. He was a powerful man, a master of media and politics, a man who knew exactly how to fight, and he had just dragged Caspian's secret war into the light. The mission was no longer just about saving his clan. Now, it was about defending his very legacy from a cunning, ruthless enemy who would use his own daughter as a weapon against them. Caspian looked from Orion's furious face to Silas's worried one. He felt their shared bond straining, a rope being pulled in 3 different directions. The weight of leadership settled on him, heavier than ever before. His next move couldn't be just for the clan. It had to be a counterattack against Elias Vance. He had to engage with Lyra's family, the very last thing he ever wanted to do. He had to make a choice. And for the first time in his life, Caspian Vulkov, the man with a plan for everything, had no idea what the right move was. The game had changed, and he was already losing. Chapter 7. The Gilded Cage. In the aftermath of the disastrous public reveal, Caspian chose a new tactic. Force had failed. Ignoring the problem had failed. Now he would try reason. He believed, with the full force of his strategic mind, that if he could just make Lyra understand the logic of her situation, she would accept it. It was a flawless plan, because it was based on sense and order. He would go to her, he would explain the benefits of her new life, and he would win her over. He entered the sanctuary again. Lyra was sitting on the floor as far away from the luxurious furniture as possible, her arms wrapped around her knees. She looked up when he came in, and her eyes were not filled with tears but with a cold, hard fire. It was the first sign his flawless plan was about to fail. "I've come to talk," he began, keeping his voice even and calm. He gestured around the room. "I want you to see this place not as a prison, but as a gift. You have access to any food, any entertainment, any knowledge you desire. I can teach you about the power you now carry. The Genesis marker isn't just a cure. It's a source of immense energy. Your energy. I can help you understand it." He was offering her the world, a chance to learn about a power she never knew she had. He was offering security, comfort, and purpose. It was a generous offer, a logical one. Why would anyone refuse it?
Lyra listened to his words, and it felt like he was speaking a different language. He spoke of gifts, but all she saw were bars. He spoke of security, but all she felt was the cold dread of a captive. He stood there, so tall and sure of himself, a king explaining the wonderful features of his new gilded cage. Every word he said was meant to soothe her, but it only made her anger burn brighter and colder. Because he didn't see her at all. He only saw a problem he was trying to solve. "A gift?" she finally said, her voice dangerously quiet. She slowly got to her feet, never taking her eyes off him. "Let me tell you what you've given me. You've given me a prison with a nice view. You've put your feeling inside my head without my permission. And you've stolen my life and called it a destiny." She took a step closer, and he didn't move. He just watched her, his gray eyes unreadable. "You want to teach me about my power? You talk about it like it's a new toy. You don't care about me. You only care about what I can do for you, for your clan." She saw a flicker of something in his eyes then. Frustration. Good. She wanted him to be frustrated. She wanted him to see that his perfect, logical world didn't work on her. "You think your need for control is a strength, Caspian," she said, using his name for the first time. It felt like a weapon on her tongue. "But you're wrong. It's a weakness. It's fear. You're so afraid of things not going according to your plan that you have to lock everything and everyone in a box. You've locked away your own feelings, your brother's feelings. And now you're trying to lock me away too. But I won't fit in your box." Her words struck him with the force of a physical blow. Your need for control is a weakness and it's fear. No one had ever spoken to him like that. No one had ever dared. He had always seen his control as his greatest asset, the very thing that made him a strong leader. But the way she said it, with such chilling, clear certainty, it planted a seed of doubt in his mind. He was losing. This conversation, this entire strategy, was a complete failure. He had come here to make her see reason, and instead she had made him see a crack in his own soul. He felt a strange, unsettling mix of simmering frustration and respect. Her spirit was like a diamond, something his power could not seem to crush or even scratch. She was not a variable. She was a force of nature. He had no response. For the first time in his life, he was speechless. He turned and left the sanctuary, the sound of her quiet breathing louder in his ears than any explosion. As he walked down the corridor, he saw his brothers. Orion and Silas were in the middle of a heated, hushed argument. Silas was gesturing wildly, his face full of pain. Orion had his arms crossed, his expression like thunder. They were arguing about Lyra, about him. Their division was a perfect mirror of the chaos she had just unleashed inside his own mind. His perfect plan was not just failing, it was tearing his entire world apart, starting with his own family. Chapter 8. The Weight of the Bond. After Caspian left, the silence in the sanctuary was worse than the shouting. Lyra sank back to the floor, her body trembling. The anger had drained away, leaving behind a deep, hollow exhaustion. And something else. A constant humming presence in the back of her mind. The bond. It wasn't just a word. It was a real, living thing. And it was an invasion. It was like having 3 radio stations playing in her head at once, all of them fighting for control. She could feel them, her captors, even when they weren't there. She felt the big one, Orion, a hot, restless anger that simmered like a volcano. He wanted to fight, to conquer. His emotions were sharp and painful, like broken glass. Then there was Silas, the quiet one. His presence was a soft, sorrowful rain. He felt guilty. His pity was almost worse than Orion's anger, because it felt like he was apologizing for her cage even as he kept her locked inside it. It was a gentle, suffocating sadness. And then there was Caspian. His feelings were the most confusing of all. He was a wall of cold, hard control, a fortress of logic. But now, after their argument, she could feel the cracks in that wall. Underneath all that ice, there was a churning sea of frustration, a flicker of doubt, and a deep, cold certainty that felt like the loneliest thing in the universe. Their emotions bled into hers, swirling with her own fear and rage until she couldn't tell what was hers and what was theirs. It was a constant, exhausting noise. She tried to push it out, to build a wall in her own mind, but it was useless. It was like trying to hold back the ocean. The bond was a 2-way street, and she was trapped in the middle of a psychic traffic jam. The only thing she wanted was silence, a moment of peace inside her own head. Was that too much to ask?
Miles away in his sterile office, Caspian gripped the edge of his desk. His mission was to create a counter-strategy against Elias Vance, but he couldn't think. He couldn't focus. Because Lyra's emotions were crashing into him like a tidal wave. He, who had spent his entire life mastering his own feelings, was now being drowned in hers. He felt her grief for her stolen life, a hollow ache in his own chest. He felt her panic, a frantic, fluttering bird trapped behind his ribs. These were emotions he hadn't allowed himself to feel in years, and their sudden, sharp reality was making him irrational. He was losing his most valuable weapon, his control. He closed his eyes, gritting his teeth. He tried to use the mental disciplines he'd been taught since birth. Build a wall, a shield, block it out. He focused on the cold, hard lines of his desk, the quiet hum of his console, anything to anchor himself. For a moment, it worked. The chaotic noise of her feelings faded to a dull roar. He pulled up a financial projection, trying to track the damage Elias's broadcast was doing to his company's stock. He needed to find a weakness, a pressure point. But as he stared at the numbers, a wave of pure, hopeless despair washed over him. It wasn't his. It was hers. It came out of nowhere, so powerful and so absolute that his vision blurred. He hit the wrong key, deleting a critical line of code. An alarm blared. He slammed his fist on the console, silencing it. He was breathing hard, a thin sheen of sweat on his brow. He had failed. The wall had crumbled. He couldn't block her out. The bond wasn't a tool he could control. It was a living connection, and it was forcing him to feel every ounce of her pain, whether he wanted to or not. His mind couldn't solve this. His strategy couldn't fix it, and that terrified him more than anything. Just as he was catching his breath, he felt a new spike through the bond. It wasn't sadness or anger. It was pure, primal terror. Her terror. And with it came a strange, wild surge of energy, a humming, powerful vibration that felt different from anything he'd ever felt before. It felt like a warning. Chapter 9. The dormant power. That spike of raw terror and the bizarre energy surge that followed it was a signal Caspian couldn't ignore. It was an anomaly, a wild card in a game he was already losing. An instant later, a security alert flashed on his console. Sanctuary systems malfunction. Biometric stress levels, critical. He was moving before he even finished reading the words. He ran from his office, his heart hammering against his ribs for the second time in as many days. This time, however, it wasn't the thrill of the hunt. It was a cold, sharp dread. He had created this situation. He had locked her in a cage, and now the cage was breaking. When he burst into the sanctuary, The scene was one of controlled chaos. The lights were flickering wildly from a dim, sickly green to a blinding white. The holographic wall, which was supposed to show a peaceful forest, was a glitching, wavering mess of static and distorted trees. The air hummed with a powerful, unstable energy. It was the same strange energy his tech had reported just before the marking. Silas's shadow. It was real. And in the far corner, backed against the wall, was Lyra.
Lyra was terrified. The room itself felt like it was having a panic attack along with her. The constant buzz of the brothers' emotions in her head, mixed with her own spiraling fear, had created a feedback loop of pure terror. She felt trapped, not just in the room, but inside her own skin. The walls felt like they were closing in. The air felt too thick to breathe. She watched as the holographic wall began to break down. The peaceful image of the forest twisted into something monstrous. The light flickered and a low groaning sound came from the walls. The system was overloading, and she had a horrible, gut-wrenching feeling that it was her fault. Her fear was doing this. Her pain was making the room fall apart. She saw Caspian rush in, his face a mask of alarm. He started toward her, but a shower of sparks from the ceiling stopped him. The groaning sound grew louder, and the holographic wall shimmered violently, threatening to collapse into a wave of raw energy. There was nowhere to run. This was it. She was going to be consumed by the very technology meant to keep her safe. She didn't scream. She didn't cry. A strange calm washed over her. She closed her eyes, bracing for the end. She just wanted the noise to stop.
Caspian watched, frozen in a mixture of horror and awe. He saw her close her eyes, saw her surrender. He lunged forward, ready to shield her with his own body, consequences be damned. But he was too late. Just as the wall was about to implode, something impossible happened. A soft green light pulsed from Lyra. It wasn't violent or explosive. It was a gentle, silent wave of pure energy that radiated from her in a perfect circle. The flickering lights in the room steadied, casting a warm, even glow. The groaning from the walls stopped. The holographic wall, which had been a mess of static and collapsing light, shimmered once, then solidified. It was perfectly repaired, the image of the peaceful forest clearer and more vibrant than before. The room was silent, still, safe. She had done it. Her. He had seen it with his own eyes. She hadn't consciously done anything. Her power had simply reacted, lashing out to protect her, to save her. This wasn't just a marker. It wasn't just a passive cure. It was an active, sentient power, a dormant force of nature. His entire understanding of the prophecy, of his mission, of her, shattered into a million pieces. He had seen her as a key, an asset, a cure to be administered. But he was wrong. She was a weapon, a miracle, a bomb that he had brought into the heart of his home with no idea how to disarm it. He had been so worried about controlling her, he never stopped to consider what would happen if he couldn't control her power. He slowly walked toward her. She opened her eyes, looking around the now calm room. Then she looked at her own hands, a deep, shuddering terror on her face. It wasn't the fear of a captive anymore. It was the fear of someone who had just seen the monster inside herself. That genuine, profound fear in her eyes was the thing that finally, completely, cracked his strategic shell. All his plans, his logic, his duty, it all fell away. And in its place was a new, powerful, and utterly terrifying emotion. Protectiveness, not for his clan, not for the cure, for her. Chapter 10. War of Ghosts. In the wake of Lyra's unintentional display of power, a fragile quiet settled over the apex tower. But outside its walls, the war raged on. Elias Vance was a ghost, an enemy Caspian couldn't see or touch, and he was bleeding them dry. He wasn't using armies or weapons, he was using information. And in their technologically advanced world, information was the most dangerous weapon of all. Caspian stood in his command center, but it was no longer a place of calm control. It was a triage unit in a war zone. Red alerts flashed across screens like open wounds. Techs shouted numbers and damage reports back and forth. The air, usually so cold and clean, tasted metallic, like ozone and panic. The steady hum of the servers had become a strained, high-pitched whine. Elias's data phantoms, slivers of malicious code that moved like ghosts through the global network, were everywhere. "He's hit our offshore accounts in the Zurich sector," a tech yelled. "He's not stealing the money. He's just deleting it." Caspian's jaw tightened. This wasn't about profit. It was about destruction. Elias wasn't trying to get rich. He was trying to tear down their entire financial empire piece by piece. Caspian was a master of the boardroom, a shark in a world of suits and numbers. But this was a back-alley knife fight in the dark, and he was losing. Because his power was in institutions, in systems, in order. Elias's power was in chaos. Orion stood beside him, a useless giant. His fists were clenched so tight his knuckles were white. "Just give me a target, Caspian," he growled, his voice a low rumble of frustration. "One building, one person, anything I can hit." "You can't punch a ghost, Orion," Caspian said, his eyes never leaving the cascading lines of failing code on the main screen. "This is his battlefield, not ours." This was a war of ghosts and shadows, and it was a conflict that exposed their greatest weakness. They were a clan of immense physical and psychic power, but they were tied to a corporate empire, an empire that was now under siege by a single brilliant man driven by a father's rage. Or was it something more? What did Elias really want? Was it just to get his daughter back, or did he know about the power she held? Did he want to use her just as Caspian had? The thought made him feel sick. Suddenly, a new alert flashed on the screen, this one a piercing, violent red. It was different from the financial alarms. It was an internal security breach. "Alpha!" Jorik, the young tech, cried out, his face pale. "It's a virus, a data phantom, but it's bypassed our main firewalls. It's not going for our financial data. Oh no." "Where is it going, Jorik?" Caspian demanded, his voice dangerously low. "It's targeting the sanctuary's life support and security systems, sir," Jorik stammered. "It's a spiteful attack. It's designed to trigger a full system-wide lockdown. It's trying to seal her in." The blood drained from Caspian's face. The war was no longer just outside their walls. Elias had found a way in. He had made it personal. He wasn't just trying to hurt the Vulkov clan anymore. He was trying to hurt her. An animalistic rage, hot and fierce, tore through Caspian's controlled mind. This was no longer a strategic battle. It was a vendetta. And Elias had just crossed a line. Before anyone could move, alarms blared through the entire tower. Red emergency lights bathed the command center in a hellish glow. A computerized voice, cold and final, echoed from the speakers. "System-wide lockdown initiated. Sanctuary isolation protocol engaged. All systems failing." The ghost had just trapped Lyra in a collapsing cage.
Chapter 11. The Genesis Unbound. The first thing Lyra noticed was the sound. The soft, gentle hum of the sanctuary died, replaced by a loud, angry siren that wailed like a wounded animal. Red lights flashed, strobing against the walls and making her heart pound in a frantic, painful rhythm. A cold, metallic voice boomed from hidden speakers, talking about a lockdown, about systems failing. She was trapped. Again. But this time felt different, more dangerous. She scrambled to her feet, her eyes darting around the room. The holographic forest on the wall began to flicker and distort, the peaceful trees twisting into monstrous shapes, just like before. But this time, it wasn't just glitching. The wall itself, a sheet of solid light and energy, was starting to dissolve. It shimmered violently, patches of it vanishing into static, showing the cold, hard metal wall behind it. It looked like a sheet of ice cracking under pressure. A low, groaning sound filled the room, the sound of technology dying. The wall wasn't just a picture anymore. It was collapsing, and it was going to crush her. Panic, cold and sharp, seized her. She backed away, pressing herself into the far corner of the room, as far from the disintegrating wall as she could get. There was nowhere to go. No escape. The door was sealed. This was a cage, and the cage was falling apart.
Caspian ran. He didn't think. He didn't strategize. He just moved. The cold, logical part of his brain was screaming about protocols and procedures, but the new, primal part of him, the part that had roared to life when he saw her fear, was in complete control. His only goal, his only mission was to get to her, save her. He burst through the final security door and into the sanctuary. The scene was worse than he had imagined. Alarms blared, sparks rained from the ceiling, and the hard light wall was peeling away in chunks, collapsing inward. He saw Lyra, huddled in the corner, her face pale with terror. She wasn't screaming, she wasn't crying. Her eyes were wide, locked on the collapsing wall, but there was a strange stillness about her, a surrender, and that scared him more than anything. He lunged toward her, ready to throw his body over hers, to shield her from the blast of energy he knew was coming. But then, she closed her eyes, and the world exploded in green light. It wasn't a violent explosion. It was a silent, beautiful, terrifying wave of power that erupted from her. A pulse of pure, raw energy, the color of new leaves and ancient forests, washed over the entire room. Caspian was thrown back a step, not by a physical force, but by the sheer, overwhelming presence of the energy. It sang in his bones, a song of creation and life itself. The groaning of the failing wall stopped. The screaming sirens went silent. The collapsing sections of light didn't just freeze. They flowed back into place, reforming and repairing themselves in an instant. The wall shimmered once, the pure green energy washing over it, and then it was solid. Perfect. The image of the peaceful forest returned, more vibrant and real than ever before. The room was quiet. Still. Safe. Caspian stared, his mind completely blank. The game hadn't just changed. It had been wiped off the board. She was not a cure to be administered. She was not a passive asset. She was a force of nature, a power beyond his comprehension. The prophecies, the science, his entire life's work, it was all wrong, or at least it was all incomplete. He finally understood the strange energy readings, Silas's vision of a shadow. It was this. It was her. He slowly straightened up, his eyes locked on her. Lyra opened her eyes. She looked at her own hands, then at the perfectly repaired wall, and a deep, shuddering terror washed over her face. She was terrified of what she had just done, of the power she held. That look, that pure, undiluted fear. It shattered the last remaining piece of his strategic shell. His mission was no longer to use her to save his clan. It was to protect her from a world that would want to use that power, to protect her from his enemies, from his own people, and most of all, to protect her from himself. He took a step toward her, his hands open, his heart pounding with a new, fierce, and utterly consuming purpose. He no longer saw a cure. He saw a woman, and he would not let anyone hurt her. Chapter 12. A different kind of plan. The quiet hum of the repaired sanctuary did nothing to soothe the roaring in Caspian's mind. Everything he thought he knew, about the prophecy, about his duty, about Lyra, had been a lie, or at least a half-truth. She wasn't a key. She was a fire, a dormant power so immense it had saved her life without her even trying, and he, in his arrogance, had almost gotten her killed. The realization settled in his bones, cold and heavy. His entire life had been dedicated to a mission, but he had been reading the map all wrong. Driven by this new, terrifying clarity, he saw that his old plan was not just flawed, it was monstrous. To use her, to control her power, would be like trying to chain the sun. It would destroy her, and likely them along with her. There was only one path forward. It was a path that went against every tradition he had ever known, against the very core of his strategic nature. He had to protect her, Not for the clan. For her. His new goal was simple, yet it felt like the most radical thing he had ever considered. He had to find a way to set her free. He would negotiate with Elias Vance. He would offer a truce, anything, in exchange for calling off his information war and ensuring Lyra's safety. It was a desperate plan, born not of logic, but of a raw, primal need to undo the damage he had done. It felt terrifying, and it felt right. He went to her. She was sitting on the edge of the large, comfortable bed, looking small and lost in the opulent room. When she saw him, she flinched, her eyes full of a new kind of fear, the fear of herself.
Lyra saw him approach, and her first instinct was to shrink away. She was terrified of him, yes, but now she was also terrified of the strange, buzzing power under her own skin. She felt like a bomb that could go off at any moment. She expected him to be angry, to demand answers about what she'd done to the wall. She expected him to be the same cold, calculating man who had kidnapped her. But the man who stopped in front of her was different. The icy control in his eyes was gone, replaced by a deep, stormy uncertainty. She could feel it through the bond, a chaotic mix of his fear, his regret, and a fierce, desperate resolve that was pointed toward her. "Lyra," he began, his voice softer than she'd ever heard it. "I was wrong." The words hung in the air between them, 3 simple words that changed everything. She stared at him, speechless. "Everything I did, taking you, forcing the bond, it was based on a belief that I was fulfilling a destiny, that I was saving my people," he continued, his gaze unwavering. "But I was just being a tyrant. I saw you as a solution, not a person, and I put you in danger. What happened with the wall? That power? I never knew it was possible." He took a careful step closer. "I am not going to use you. I am not going to force you to be our cure. My new plan, my only plan, is to get you out of here safely. I am going to contact your father. I will negotiate for your freedom." She searched his face, her mind reeling. Could she trust this? Was this another trick? Another strategy? But the bond didn't lie. She could feel the truth of his words vibrating through it. He was just as scared as she was. He was breaking with his entire world, all for her. "Why?" she whispered, the question fragile. "Because," he said, and the raw honesty in his voice made her breath catch. "I finally see you, and I won't be the monster that destroys you." He held out his hand, not to take, but to offer. "I can't do this without your trust. Will you trust me? Just this once?" Her heart hammered against her ribs. Every instinct screamed at her to say no, to run. But where could she run? And the sincerity she felt from him. It was a tiny flicker of light in a world of darkness. Slowly, hesitantly, she gave a single, almost imperceptible nod.
That small nod felt like a bigger victory than capturing her ever had. It was a fragile beginning, a single thread of trust he knew he could not break. Leaving her in the sanctuary, he went to brief his brothers. He found them in the briefing room, the tension between them a thick, suffocating blanket. He laid out his new plan: negotiate with Elias, offer a truce, and release Lyra. Orion looked at him as if he'd grown a second head. "What?" he exploded. "You want to just let her go? After everything we've been through? After we marked her? Caspian, have you lost your mind? That's not how our clan works. We don't surrender." "This isn't surrender, Orion. It's the only move we have left that doesn't end in utter disaster," Caspian said calmly. But it was Silas who surprised him. As Orion fumed, Silas stepped forward, and for the first time since this whole nightmare began, he looked at Caspian with something other than sadness. It was a look of quiet, profound respect. He gave a slow, supportive nod. The dynamic between the 3 of them had been completely turned on its head, and Caspian knew as he met his empathic brother's gaze that he had finally chosen the right path. Chapter 13. The Unmasking. Following his new, fragile path, Caspian arranged the meeting. He didn't use his own channels, which he now knew Elias could watch. He went through a neutral third party, an old information broker who valued discretion above all else. The location was a private suite on the top floor of a silent, automated hotel in the city's neutral zone, a place of glass and chrome where no one had allegiances. He brought Orion with him, not for a fight, but as a guard, a silent, intimidating presence. He walked into the suite feeling a quiet desperation. His entire hope rested on this conversation, on the idea that Elias Vance was, at his core, a father who simply wanted his daughter back. Caspian was prepared to offer almost anything: financial restitution, public apologies, technological treaties, all in exchange for Lyra's safety and freedom. He was ready to humble himself, to sacrifice his pride for her, because he had to believe that a father's love was a force for reason. The suite was empty, except for a single chair in the center of the room. There was no envoy, no person at all. A cold feeling, the familiar prickle of a flawed strategy, crawled up Caspian's spine. "It's a trap," Orion growled, his hand instinctively going to the weapon hidden under his jacket. Before they could react, the air in front of the chair shimmered. A life-sized holographic image of Elias Vance flickered into existence. He was sitting in the chair, a smug, cold smile on his face. He looked directly at Caspian. "Thank you for coming, Alpha Vulkov," Elias said, his voice smooth and dripping with scorn. "I knew you would. Your predictability is one of your most charming qualities." "Where is your envoy?" Caspian demanded, keeping his voice steady, betraying none of the cold dread flooding his system. "I am my own envoy," Elias replied with a lazy wave of his hand. "I just didn't want to be there when my associates collected the information from your transport. The access codes, the security blind spots. Very useful. Thank you." He had been played. The meeting itself was the trap. Elias had used it to hack their systems. But for what? "What do you want, Vance?" Caspian asked, cutting to the point. "You have my attention. You have my offer of a truce. Let Lyra go, and this war between us ends." Elias leaned forward, his holographic eyes glittering with a chilling, predatory light. And in that moment, Caspian saw it. The same hunger for power, the same ruthless ambition he had once seen in his own mirror. "Oh, I don't want to free Lyra," Elias said with a soft chuckle. "Why would I want to free the most powerful weapon this world has ever seen? You see, you and I are not so different, Caspian. We both saw her potential. But your methods, so crude. Forcing a bond, tying her to your dying bloodline." He shook his head in mock pity. "I have a much more elegant solution." He held up a small silver device in his holographic hand. "This little beauty can do two things. First, it can sever your precious psychic bond, cutting her free from you forever. And second," he said, his smile widening, "it can harness the Genesis marker. It can isolate her power and transfer control of it. I don't want a cure for your family, you see. I want a weapon for mine. I want her power, and I want it under my thumb." The truth hit Caspian with the force of a physical blow. A cold, calculated rage filled him. He felt a terrible, shameful kinship with this monster. Elias wasn't a desperate father. He was a manipulator, a villain who saw his own daughter as nothing more than an asset to be controlled. The man Caspian had almost become. "I have the location of your hidden facility, thanks to the data we just acquired," Elias said, his voice turning hard. "You have 24 hours to deliver my daughter to me, unharmed. If you refuse, I will come and take her. And I will burn your pathetic clan to ash while I do it." The hologram vanished, leaving Caspian and Orion alone in the silent, empty room. The peaceful plan was a catastrophic failure. He hadn't just failed to save her. He had led her enemies right to her doorstep. There was no negotiation. There was no turning back. This was a fight to the death. He raced back to the tower. He went straight to the sanctuary and told Lyra everything. He saw the terror return to her eyes, but underneath it, he felt something new through the bond. A fragile, steely resolve. Her fear was still there, but now it was his fear too. Their minds, once a battleground, were now a shared foxhole in a war they had to fight together. Chapter 14. When the Walls Fall. The 24-hour deadline from Elias Vance felt like a ticking time bomb strapped to Caspian's soul. In the wake of his devastating failure, he had thrown himself into the only thing he knew: strategy. He worked with his teams, shoring up digital defenses, setting up kinetic barriers, and trying to predict where Elias's forces would strike. He was preparing for a siege, but his heart wasn't in it. His every thought, every beat of his heart, was consumed by a single frantic purpose: keeping Lyra safe. His focus was split, his loyalty torn between his duty as an alpha and his desperate, newfound need to protect the woman in the sanctuary. He was in the command center, tracking enemy movements when the attack came. And it came all wrong. It wasn't a frontal assault. There was no army at their gates. Instead, the tower began to die from the inside out. Using the security codes they'd stolen during the fake meeting, Elias's elite teams bypassed their main defenses. They were like ghosts, striking surgically at the tower's weakest points. An explosion rocked the east wing, a power conduit. The lights flickered and died, plunging half the tower into darkness. Emergency power kicked in, but it was weak. Another blast from the lower levels, a communications hub. Their links to the outside world were severed. "They're not trying to conquer the tower," a tech screamed over the rising chaos. "They're trying to cripple it, to isolate us." And Caspian understood. This wasn't a siege. It was an extraction. They were cutting the tower off, section by section, to create a clear path to their prize. To Lyra. His blood ran cold. He looked at the tactical map, at the blinking red lights showing system failures. His training, his entire life, screamed at him to stay here, to command the defense, to be the alpha. But the raw, undeniable pull of the bond, the psychic tether that pulsed with Lyra's rising terror, was stronger. He chose her. "Yorick, you have command," Caspian snapped, turning from the console. "Lock down everything you can. Defend the core. That's your only priority." He didn't wait for an answer. He ran. He abandoned his post, his duty, everything. For her. The corridors were a nightmare of flashing red lights and the shriek of alarms. Smoke, thick and acrid, choked the air. He sprinted past his own security teams, engaging small, shadowy squads of Elias's soldiers. The clean, sterile halls of his home had become a battlefield. He sealed his helmet, the world becoming a filtered view of data overlays and heat signatures. He was almost there. He could feel her panic like a knife in his gut. The sanctuary was just around the corner. He rounded the final turn, and his heart stopped. The reinforced titanium door to the sanctuary was blown clean off its hinges, bent and blackened like twisted licorice. The air hummed with the fading energy of a strange device lying on the floor, sputtering its last sparks. The room was a wreck. Furniture was overturned. The holographic wall was a dead gray slate, and it was empty. She was gone.
Chapter 15. The Echo of Silence. The moment before they came for her, Lyra did something she hadn't planned. Her heart was a frantic drum against her ribs, the sounds of explosions echoing through the tower. She could feel Caspian's frantic rush toward her through the bond, a wave of pure, desperate protectiveness. But she knew, with a sudden, chilling certainty, that he wouldn't make it in time. Her father was coming for his weapon. Her hands trembled as she pulled a small, plain data chip from a hidden pocket in her sleeve, a relic from her library job. She didn't know if Caspian would find it. She didn't know if he would even look. But she had to try. With a whispered prayer, she shoved it deep into the cushions of the sofa, a tiny message in a bottle thrown into a raging sea. Then, the door to her gilded cage exploded inward. Men in dark, tactical gear flooded the room. They moved with a terrifying, silent efficiency. She didn't have time to scream. They surrounded her, and one of them held up a small silver device, the one Elias had shown Caspian in the hologram. He aimed it at her. "Don't fight," the man said, his voice a cold, flat monotone. "It will be less painful if you don't fight." She felt a surge of her own power, the green energy, rising up in defense. But before it could lash out, the man pressed a button. A high-pitched whine filled the air, and a beam of sickly yellow light shot from the device, engulfing her.
Caspian stood in the ruined doorway of the sanctuary, his world collapsing inward. He saw the empty room, the smoking device, the signs of a struggle. But he didn't need to see it. He could feel it. The bond. The living, breathing connection that had tied him to Lyra, the constant hum of her presence in his mind. It was ripped away. It wasn't a gentle fading. It was a violent, brutal amputation. A psychic limb was torn from his soul, leaving behind a raw, screaming wound. 1 second she was there, a frantic, terrified, but brilliant light in his mind. The next, nothing. Just a dead, echoing silence that was louder than any scream. A strangled cry was torn from his throat, and he staggered back, clutching his head as if he could physically hold on to what he'd just lost. The pain was unbearable. It was a physical agony, a deep, hollowing grief, a crushing failure all rolled into one. His knees buckled, and he fell to the floor amidst the debris, the silence in his head an endless black void. He had failed. The one thing he was born to do, the one woman he was meant to save. Gone. And it was his fault. Every choice, every arrogant assumption, every cold, logical plan had led to this moment. He tried to control her. He treated her like an object. And because of that, he had lost her to a man who was just a darker reflection of himself. Orion and Silas found him there moments later. They skidded to a halt in the doorway, their faces masks of horror. They didn't need to ask. He could see it in their eyes. They felt it too. The shared void. The black hole where their bond with Lyra used to be. The three of them, the powerful Vulkov alphas, were kneeling in the wreckage of their greatest failure, united not by their strength, but by a shared, devastating silence. His eyes, blurred with tears he didn't know he could still cry, scanned the room. The destruction, the emptiness. His gaze caught on something small and unassuming, wedged into the sofa cushions. It wasn't a piece of the wreckage. It was something else. He crawled forward, his body aching with a pain that had nothing to do with the battle. His trembling fingers pulled it free, a single plain data chip. Chapter 16. A message in the ruins. The apex tower was a tomb, echoing with the silence of their failure. Caspian knelt in the ruins of the sanctuary, the small data chip feeling impossibly heavy in his palm. It was the only thing left of her. His brothers stood behind him, their usual dynamic of fire and water extinguished, leaving only a shared, hollow grief. They were waiting for him to lead, to command. But the leader in him was dead. With a trembling hand, he inserted the chip into the port on his wrist console. He didn't know what to expect. A final angry message? A plea for help? A hologram flickered to life in front of him. It was Lyra. She was standing in this very room before the attack. She looked scared, her eyes wide and haunted, but her voice when she spoke was not broken. It was clear, steady, resolved. "Caspian," she began, and hearing her voice was like a knife twisting in the fresh wound in his soul. "If you're watching this, it means I'm gone. It means my father came for me." She took a deep, shaky breath. "I know you're going to blame yourself. And you should. You took me from my home. You forced this bond on me. You started this. But that doesn't have to be how it ends." Her image flickered slightly, and she looked directly at him, her gaze so intense it felt like she was really there. "I'm sending this because I need you to understand. This power inside me, the Genesis marker, it's not what you think it is. It's not a weapon. It's not a tool to be controlled. When the wall was collapsing, I wasn't trying to fight it. I was just trying to make the chaos stop. The power. It healed the room. It didn't attack it. She paused, and her expression softened into a desperate plea. That's its purpose, Caspian. To heal. To mend what's broken. It's been trying to heal the sickness in your bloodline from the moment you marked me. But it can't be forced. A true destiny. It has to be chosen. Freely. The words washed over him, extinguishing the last embers of his rage and leaving only a vast, empty landscape of grief and shame. She was right. He had seen it as a weapon to be wielded, first by him, then by her father. But it was a force for healing, and he had tried to chain it. Don't come for me like a conqueror, Lyra's voice pleaded, pulling him back. Don't try to save me by being the man you were. That man will only get us both killed. Your strength isn't in your control, Caspian. It never was. It's in your heart, the heart you keep locked away. I know it's there. I felt it. Tears streamed down Caspian's face, hot and silent. He was no longer the alpha, no longer the strategist. He was just a man, stripped bare, face to face with the truth of his own soul. He had lived his entire life in a cage of his own making, a prison built of logic and duty, and she, his captive, had just shown him the key. Save me, she whispered, her voice finally breaking. But save me by believing in me. Believe in us. That's the only way. The hologram vanished. He was left in the silence, on his knees, utterly broken. The old Caspian was dead, slain by the truth in a dead woman's message. He looked up at his brothers, his face a ruin of grief. He didn't need to speak. He shared the recording, playing it again in their minds through the fractured remnants of their bond. He watched the same understanding dawn on their faces, the same grief, the same shame. And then, something new, a new kind of fire. They were no longer three alphas bound by a dying prophecy. They were just brothers, united by a shared, desperate love, and a single, all-consuming need. To find Lyra, and to be the men she believed they could be. Chapter 17. An echo in the dark. In the suffocating silence of the ruined tower, despair was a poison. Caspian felt it trying to seep into his bones to paralyze him. But Lyra's message, her impossible, stubborn belief in him, had become his antidote. The old Caspian was gone, burned away in the fires of his own failure. The man who stood in his place was not a strategist, not an alpha, in the old sense of the word. He was a man with a single, burning purpose. Find Lyra. His love for her, a feeling he hadn't even had a name for until he'd lost her, was now his only guide. Following the moments after her message faded, his brothers looked at him, their faces a mixture of grief and expectation. Orion, ever the warrior, began to pace, his voice a low, angry growl. We mobilize everything. Our security forces, our fleet. We'll tear this city apart, stone by stone, until we find where that bastard is hiding her. We'll burn his entire world to the ground. And what if we're too late, Orion? Caspian asked, his voice quiet but firm. What if we burn the whole world down, only to find her ashes? We are flying blind. He could be anywhere. It was then that Silas, who had been sitting silently with his eyes closed, spoke. His voice was soft, but it cut through Orion's rage like a surgeon's knife. Not entirely blind. Both Caspian and Orion turned to him. Silas looked pale, his face strained as if he were listening to a sound 1,000 miles away. The bond. Elias's device didn't sever it. Not completely, he whispered, his eyes fluttering open. They were unfocused, looking at something none of them could see. I can feel an echo. It's faint. So faint. Like hearing a whisper through a thick stone wall. But it's there. It's her. Hope. It was a dangerous, fragile thing, but it shot through Caspian's chest like a bolt of lightning. He crossed the room in 3 long strides, kneeling in front of his younger brother. You're sure? You can feel her? I can feel her hope, Silas corrected, a small, pained smile touching his lips. And her fear. It's a direction. A pull. Like a compass needle flickering toward a distant hidden magnet. It's not a map, Caspian, but it's a lead. Our only lead.
Lyra sat in a cold, sterile cell. The room was white, seamless, and silent. The energy of the silver device they'd used on her had left her feeling hollowed out, as if a vital part of her had been scooped away. The constant, noisy presence of the three brothers in her head was gone, and the silence she had once craved was now a terrifying, lonely void. Her father, she couldn't even think of him that way anymore. He was just Elias, had visited her once. He'd smiled his cold smile and told her she would soon help him change the world. She knew what that meant. He wanted to use her, to turn her into the weapon she had always feared she could be. But in the crushing emptiness, she held on to one thing, the memory of Caspian's face when he'd told her he was wrong, the feeling of his raw, desperate sincerity through the bond. He had changed. She had felt it. Clinging to that memory, she closed her eyes. She focused on the place inside her where the bond used to be, that empty, aching space. She gathered all her hope, all her fear, all her belief in the man he was trying to become, and she pushed. She projected her feelings out into the void, a silent, desperate scream for help. A lighthouse beam into a starless night, praying that somewhere, somehow, he could feel it. Caspian. I'm here. Believe in me.
Caspian felt a sudden warmth spread through his chest as Silas spoke. He knew somehow that Silas wasn't just imagining it. Lyra was out there, and she was fighting. She was calling to them. He looked at Orion, whose angry bluster had faded, replaced by a look of awestruck wonder at their brother's gift. The new plan was born in that moment. It wasn't a complex strategy with flowcharts and probabilities. It was simple. It was pure. Follow the echo. Follow their hearts. Find her, get her out, and let her choose her own path, forever. There was no more talk of destiny, no more talk of the cure. Only Lyra. All right, Caspian said, rising to his feet. His transformation was complete. He was no longer a leader of cold logic, but a man leading with a desperate faith in his brother's heart. Orion, get our gear. The light, silent kind. No army, no fleet, just us. Silas, you're our compass. His brothers didn't question him. They simply nodded. The three of them, no longer just alphas bound by duty, but brothers bound by a fierce, protective love, prepared to walk into the dark. They would follow a whisper of hope into the heart of enemy territory, because it was all they had left. And somehow it felt like more than enough. Chapter 18. 3 sides of a heart. Following the faint, trembling pull of Silas's connection, they left the glittering towers of Viridia behind. The echo led them to the city's industrial graveyard, a place of rust and shadows, where forgotten factories clawed at the sky like skeletal fingers. Deep within this metal maze, hidden beneath a derelict power station, they found it, a hidden entrance to a subterranean facility. The place felt cold, wrong. The air was thick with the sterile scent of ozone and the low thrum of stolen power. This was Elias's den. Moving with a new kind of unity, they infiltrated the facility. No alarms, no grand entrances. They moved like shadows, their movements a silent, deadly ballet. Caspian led, his mind racing, processing every angle, every shadow. But this time, his strategy was not cold and detached. It was a living thing, fueled by a desperate, passionate fire. He wasn't just moving pieces on a board. He was clearing a path for his family, for his heart. They navigated a maze of white, sterile corridors, the echo from Silas growing stronger, warmer. Hope beat a frantic rhythm in Caspian's chest. They were close, so close. Then their plan hit a snag. As they rounded a corner, a figure blocked their path. It was a man, but more. He was huge, larger than Orion, and his skin was laced with faint, glowing blue circuits. His eyes were cold, dead lights. One of Elias's enforcers. A cybernetically augmented warrior, likely designed for one purpose: to hunt and kill Vulkovs. "That's as far as you go," the enforcer said, his voice a distorted, robotic monotone. He lunged. The fight was brutal, fast. The enforcer was impossibly strong, his movements unnaturally quick. He didn't fight with passion or rage. He fought like a machine, with perfect, deadly efficiency. In the past, Orion would have met him head-on, a clash of pure brute force. But this time was different. They were different. "His left side is slower," Silas yelled, his eyes squeezed shut as he focused. Not on the physical fight, but on the psychic one. He could feel the enforcer's intent, the microsecond before a punch was thrown. "He's overcompensating for a power lag in his right arm." "Orion, draw his fire. Low," Caspian commanded, his mind instantly processing Silas's input. Orion didn't hesitate. He dropped, a blur of motion, and slammed his shoulder into the enforcer's knee. The giant roared, a sound of grinding metal, and swung his massive fist where Orion's head had been. It was exactly the opening Caspian needed. While the enforcer was off balance, Caspian moved. He vaulted over a nearby conduit, using the wall as a springboard. He landed behind the warrior, his movements fluid and precise. He slammed the heel of his palm into the cluster of glowing circuits at the base of the enforcer's neck, the power source. The giant warrior seized up, every circuit on his body flaring with blinding blue light. He shuddered, a low groan escaping his metallic throat, and then collapsed to the floor, silent and still. They stood over him, breathing hard. They hadn't won with strength alone. They had won with a perfect three-sided alliance. Orion, the body, fighting for Lyra's freedom. Silas, the heart, feeling the enemy's weakness. And Caspian, the mind, leading with a strategy now infused with a desperate, burning passion. They were finally, truly, one. Orion looked at Caspian, a grin of pure, fierce pride on his face. "Now that's how we fight." Wasting no more time, they pressed on, the pull from Silas now a powerful, undeniable hum. They came to a set of reinforced doors with a thick, armored window, and what they saw inside made Caspian's blood run cold. The central chamber was a laboratory, and in the center of it, strapped to a tall metal chair, was Lyra. Wires snaked from her arms and temples to a massive humming machine. And standing before her, his back to them, was Elias Vance. He was holding the small silver device, preparing to use it. And then Lyra's eyes flickered open. They were wide with fear, but as they locked with Caspian's through the glass, he felt it. A jolt through the bond, a surge of desperate, unbreakable hope. You came. The final battle was here. Chapter 19. The Healer's Choice. The reinforced glass of the laboratory window shattered into a million tiny diamonds as Orion charged through it. The three brothers exploded into the room, a unified storm of righteous fury. The air was cold, smelling of antiseptic and the sharp metallic tang of humming machinery. Caspian's eyes locked on two things at once: Lyra, pale and trembling in the monstrous metal chair, and Elias Vance, who spun around with a look of pure, venomous shock. "You!" Elias snarled, his face twisting into a mask of rage. "You were not supposed to find this place." "The days of you underestimating us are over, Vance," Caspian yelled, his voice a raw battle cry. His goal was simple, primal: get to Lyra, protect her at all costs. Nothing else mattered. Elias jabbed a finger at a control panel. "You're too late. I will have her power." Automated defense turrets dropped from the ceiling, glowing with deadly red light. They opened fire, unleashing a barrage of searing energy blasts. Orion met the assault head-on, a roaring whirlwind of motion, deflecting the blasts with his own kinetic shields. He was the unbreakable wall, buying them time. Silas didn't fight. He closed his eyes, his face a mask of concentration. "Two more enforcers," he said, his voice calm amidst the chaos. coming from the left corridor. They're fast. Caspian saw the door slide open and two more of the cybernetic giants stormed in. He and Silas moved as one, intercepting them. This wasn't a battle of strategy anymore. It was a desperate, chaotic brawl. Every punch, every block, every move was fueled by a single desperate thought. Lyra. He fought with a passion he never knew he possessed, his love for her a fire in his veins. He wasn't just fighting for his clan anymore. He was fighting for her right to choose her own life.
Lyra watched the chaos unfold. Her heart caught in her throat. She saw Caspian, Orion, and Silas fighting for her, not as alphas claiming their prize, but as men protecting someone they loved. She could feel it through the bond, which was no longer a confusing noise, but a clear, powerful song of their shared love and desperation. It flowed into her, warm and strong. She looked at her father, at Elias, and saw only a hollow man, hungry for a power he could never understand. He was fumbling with the controls of the massive machine she was wired to, his eyes wild with greed. He was about to activate the device, to rip the power from her, to turn her into his living weapon. She had a choice. She could unleash her power as a destructive force. She could bring the whole ceiling down on top of him. She could end him. The thought was tempting, a dark whisper in her mind. But then she looked at Caspian. He glanced at her for a fraction of a second, his eyes full of terror for her, and in that look she saw the man from her message, the man she believed in. And she knew what she had to do. Her power wasn't a weapon. It was a cure. She closed her eyes, but not in surrender. She embraced the bond, pulling on the brothers' fierce, protective love. She didn't just welcome it, she amplified it, mixing it with her own forgiveness and hope. Then, with a deep, shuddering breath, she released it all.
A wave of brilliant emerald green light pulsed from Lyra. It wasn't violent. It was peaceful. It washed over the entire room like a gentle tide. It wasn't a destructive force. It was a wave of pure, unadulterated life. The defense turrets, overloaded with the healing energy, sputtered and went dark, their red lights fading to nothing. The cybernetic enforcers seized up, their glowing blue circuits flickering and then dying, their bodies slumping to the floor, unharmed but completely disabled. The massive machine Lyra was strapped to whined, sparked, and then fell silent, its systems fried by an energy they were never designed to handle. The chaos simply stopped. Elias Vance stood alone in the silent, still room, his face a mask of utter disbelief. His weapons were gone. His soldiers were down. His machine was dead. He had been defeated, not by force, but by a power he could not comprehend. By love. Caspian stood panting, his body aching but his heart soaring. He had trusted her, he had believed in her, and she, in her own way, had saved them all. His transformation was complete. He was no longer a man who led with his fists or his mind alone, but a man who understood that the greatest strength comes from the heart. He looked at Lyra, truly looked at her, and for the first time, he saw her look back not with fear, not with anger, but with a look of profound, trusting love. Chapter 20. The quiet. After. In the stunning silence of the laboratory, the only sound was the ragged breathing of the three brothers. The fight was over. Elias stood amidst his broken technology, a man defeated not by an army, but by a single act of grace. He looked shrunken, his ambition and rage gone, leaving only a hollow, broken shell. Orion took a heavy step toward him, his face a mask of thunder, his intent clear. Orion, no, Caspian said, his voice quiet but absolute. He put a hand on his brother's chest, stopping him. It's over. He tried to kill her, Caspian. He tried to turn her into a weapon. Orion growled, his body vibrating with a warrior's need for justice. I know, Caspian said, his gaze shifting to the defeated man. And look at him. He's already lost everything that matters. We will not become him. We will not answer his cruelty with our own. He was speaking not just as a brother, but as a new kind of alpha. He was offering mercy, not conquest, It was his first true act of leadership, born from his new understanding. Orion stared at him for a long moment, then the anger drained from his face, replaced by a slow, respectful nod. Caspian turned his back on Elias and walked toward Lyra. His heart pounded in his chest, not with fear, but with a deep, profound tenderness. He gently worked the latches on her restraints, his fingers brushing against her skin. The cold metal fell away and she was free. She rubbed her wrists, looking at him with wide, uncertain eyes. Through the bond, he felt her exhaustion, her relief, and a hesitant question. What now? He answered it. He looked into her eyes, pouring all the sincerity of his transformed soul into his words. You are free, Lyra. Truly free, he said, his voice thick with emotion. This is your choice. No tricks, no conditions. If you want to return to your old life, we will take you there. We will protect you from a distance and never bother you again. If you want to go somewhere new, we will help you. Or, he paused, his heart in his throat. If you want, you can come with us. Not as a cure, not as a captive, but as one of us, as our partner. The choice is yours. And whatever you choose, I swear on my life, we will honor it.
Lyra listened to his words, and she felt the truth of them resonate deep within the bond. It was a clean, clear, and steady promise. He was giving her back the one thing he had stolen, her life, her choice. She looked past him, at his brothers. Orion, the fierce warrior, was looking at her with a new protective respect. Silas, the gentle empath, was smiling at her, his eyes full of a quiet, joyful relief. And Caspian. He was looking at her as if she were the sun, the moon, and all the stars. He was not the cold strategist who had taken her from her home. He was a man who had been broken down to his very core and had been rebuilt into someone stronger, better, someone who had learned to lead with his heart. She had spent her whole life in a quiet, safe cocoon. Then these men had torn it apart, dragging her into a world of violence and destiny. But along the way, something strange had happened. She had found her own strength. She had found her own power. And she had found a connection she never knew was possible. She thought of her quiet apartment, the smell of old books and tea. It was safe. It was simple. But it was also lonely. She looked back at Caspian. She looked at the future he was offering. Not a cage, but an open door. A future of partnership, of shared power, of a love built from the ashes of conflict. A future where she wouldn't be alone. Slowly, she reached out and took his hand. His fingers closed around hers, warm and strong. The psychic bond between the four of them hummed with a peaceful, resonant energy. A perfect chord. She didn't need to speak. Her choice was made. Chapter 21. A New Genesis. Weeks later, the Apex Tower felt like a different place. The cold, sterile silence had been replaced by a quiet warmth, a hum of life that had nothing to do with the machines. Laughter sometimes echoed in the halls. It was a small change, but it was everything. Lyra stood beside Caspian, looking out the grand window of his office, their office now, at the glittering expanse of Viridia below. The city no longer looked like a map to be conquered, but a world of possibilities. In the aftermath of the battle, everything had changed. Elias Vance was in the custody of the Global Council, his assets frozen, his empire dismantled. But instead of absorbing his clan, Caspian, with Lyra's guidance, had offered them a place within Viridian society, a path to redemption instead of retribution. It was an act of compassion that sent ripples of change through their entire world. She was no longer a captive. She was a teacher, a partner. She spent her days with the brothers, helping them understand the true nature of the Genesis marker. It wasn't a one-time cure, she'd explained. It was a symbiotic relationship. As long as their bond was based on love, trust, and mutual respect, Her power would actively heal and strengthen the Vulkov bloodline, pushing back the quiet fade for generations to come. Her presence had not just saved them, it had made them whole in a way they never knew they were broken. Their traditions were being rewritten. The rigid rules were being replaced by a new philosophy of compassion and inclusion. They were building a new future, together.
Caspian wrapped his arm around Lyra's shoulders, pulling her close. The quiet contentment he felt was a universe away from the cold, hollow certainty he had once mistaken for strength. He felt the steady, peaceful thrum of the bond between the four of them, a perfect, harmonious chord. Orion was now the head of their new community outreach, his protective instincts channeled into building bridges instead of walls. Silas was their chief diplomat, his empathy a powerful tool for healing old wounds and fostering new alliances. And he was the alpha. But his role was no longer to control, but to guide, to listen, to love. He looked down at Lyra, at the brilliant, strong woman who had shattered his world only to help him rebuild it into something better. He had started this story as a man of duty, a man determined to fulfill a destiny he saw as written in stone, a man who saw a person and valued her only as a cure. He was ending it as a man who understood that destiny is not a script to be followed, but a choice to be made, every single day. He learned that true power isn't control, but connection, that the greatest legacy isn't an empire, but a love built on a foundation of freedom. "What are you thinking about?" Lyra asked, her voice a soft, happy murmur. She tilted her head back to look at him, her eyes sparkling with a light that outshone all the city lights below. He smiled, a real, genuine smile that reached his eyes. Through the bond, he sent her the answer, not in words, but in pure feeling. A wave of overwhelming love, of profound peace, of a future so bright it was almost blinding. He had everything he ever needed. Not because he had finally solved his puzzle, but because he had finally realized the world wasn't a puzzle to be solved at all. It was a life to be lived, a song to be shared. And he had finally found his harmony.